Another video series on interview questions. Uh, Today, I am going to introduce an interview which I have attended uh, for the L1 round. So the company name is Luxoft. So it's a multinational organization, and this was the round one. So the tech stack is like Java, Spring Boot, Microservices, Kafka. Uh, it was for the role of engineers, software engineers, or a senior developer, or a tech lead even, right? So this the person who is going to for prepare for an interview, you can expect similar line of questions, and also if you are attending any of the, I mean, if you are attending, looking out for a Lux of company interview questions. This is my experience, what I have interviewed over there, and I am presenting you the questions over here. So let's get started. So the very first question any interviewer asks, like if you have attended a couple of interviews or like if you are starting out, right? So the very basic questions which the interviewer asks is about what tell me about yourself, and like the next question comes about like what is your roles and responsibilities, and give me the project architecture how it is, right? So what you have to do is that you have to step by step make him understand that what is your current roles and responsibilities, how is your architecture, right? So and what are things like you are aware of, like he wanted to understand that you how well you are aware of your project and how was your contribution. So from the answer what you give, right? So he will be able to understand like whether you have contributed well, or you have just worked for a from a high level, right? So they will try to judge from that part. So make sure that you are well prepared for this, so that you nail that at the very first questions, that you are well prepared for the interview. And then it can be like the first impression, like as I said, the first impression is the last impression, right? So when you give your project explanation well, you give your about yourself, you tell your boss that you're very clear and crisp, right? So he will be impressed with it. So, as this particular role interview was about Java and related technologies, uh, the very first question, like whether you are working on a latest tech stack or latest version of Java. So maybe it is like 21, 17, or 11, right? But still, interviewer would like to know like whether you have worked on Java 8, because most of the applications which are there are now are already on Java 8 or like latest version, but most of the major features have been introduced in part of Java 8. So they will this is an a must questions which are asked, so that they try to understand whether you are well aware of it, right? So when it comes to Java 8, right, there were Stream API. So with the help of like Stream API, you will be able to do the internal terminal and the intermediate operations over there, right? And then you'll be able to perform some operation on the collection. You're not going to modify the collections itself, but you are going to take that particular source, and then you produce some output. It can be a stream, it can be a list, or any other output, right? There were changes with respect to date and time API. So there were like like local time now and other things. So this were the date and time related changes which are there introduced in it. Lambda expression. So when it comes to you're dealing with an functional programming, and then you're trying to run a concise code, right? So the declarative way of writing and executing using the lambda expression, let's say the functional methods, right, which are there. And so the interface has got methods, right? So symbol abstract methods. So there is an make use of a lambda expression, so that you can write that and execute those without writing, defining those particular classes and running it. So there is a method references. You will be able to call create instances. You have to call static members. You will link to you can, with the help of the meta reference, you will be able to call multiple methods and things. Functional interface. So this is an not a new concept, but it has been there were functional interface already, but now like with the annotation and some rules and regulation, it has come, and then there is an annotation which has been created, and then it checks for that particular interface has got a single abstract method. And along with that, there has been default and static method introduction in the interface. So let's say you have an functional interface, there can be n number of default and static methods, but there will be only single abstract method. So you need to understand that what is functional interface. You will be able to give details and explanation about it. Uh, optional is way of handling the null check exception. So you will be able to handle the null pointer exception in a well way, so that it gives you either empty or some value in it, and if it is null, it is giving an optional, so that you can handle that exception, and also you can throw an exception, right? So these are the features which has been introduced at Java 8. Let's move on to the next question. Now, this was one of the practical question which was asked. So he had given a scenario where he said that I will give you a very long sentence, and then there will be this is an high word. If you see, I just gave an example of reversing it and then printing it, but basically he had given me a big string, so he wanted me to reverse that particular string. Okay, the words basically, and then in the reverse order. So we need to make sure that we was asking like to convert, make use of Java 8 and then do it, right? So this was one of the question which was asked. So basically, there are different ways to do it. There is like in that we have we can split it with the help of that split method, and then we can actually, there is a way where we can use it there, reverse the order of that particular thing. So we can achieve both using Java 8 and without Java 8. So this was the question. Let's move on to the next question. So this is one of the favorite questions of an interviewer. So you'll definitely ask this. I mean, like this is one of the most frequently asked question. So what is HashMap and like what is concurrent HashMap? What is the difference between them? So primarily, like if you see HashMap and concurrent HashMap, they both are there for a purpose. Like HashMap is used. Both are used for key and value storing, right? But there is a difference where it says that when it comes to thread safety, performance, right? When it is using in a multi-threading environment. So if you just check it, right, HashMap, it is not thread safe. So we are trying to perform or you're making use of an HashMap in a multi-threading environment, definitely it is not recommended to use it because it's not thread safe. And multiple, there will be a discrepancy or inconsistency when it comes to uh, acquiring lock and then performing and then updating the status, right? So there is no internal locking mechanism inside a map. So if there are multiple threads who are concurrently working on it, may enter in a consistent stream. So and also there's a difference where when you're trying to insert an value, key and value, right? So it allows both null key and null value. So you can insert both key and right. So and then the multi-threading environment, it leads to a poor performance. Let's say what happens is that multiple threads are trying to perform operation on it, right? So that it can even crash it because there is no because of the synchronization is not there, right? So it's externally, I would say, it is used. Now it comes to concurrent HashMap, right? It is thread safe. So basically, as you know, in HashMap or in concurrent HashMap, there are 16. Just for an example, there are bucket level things, right? So it uses a segment locking. Okay. So in just prior to this Java 8, it uses the bucket level locking, right? So to allow the better concurrency. So now in this there is a difference that in concurrent HashMap it doesn't allow to have a null or key value. If you attempt to do it, then there will be a null pointer exception. Now it is basically the concurrent HashMap is designed to work in a multi-threading environment. It allows to work on a different segment, so that, there can be different operation performed in different segments, right? It can happen multiple concurrent read and write operation. Hope you got the difference. Let's move on. And this particular question, ideally, like very nowadays, like you it is been less being asked up, but earlier when there was interviews to happen, this was one of the important questions, and basically still happens to, like it is one of the old questions, but you never know, like it's better to have been prepared for this. So these three basically used in different context, and they are three distinct, like it serves different purpose, right? So this final keyword is used with, like they are used for in a class, they are used for a variable, right? So it can also be used for a method as well. So if you see with the variable, right? So it cannot be changed once it is assigned. Now, when it comes to method, it cannot be overridden. So once it is method ridden, it cannot be overridden. Now, class, it cannot be subclassed. What is finally block? Finally block is an exception handling, code where you have a try, catch, and then finally. So whatever, no matter, like if there is an exception also, the finally block will definitely be in executed, regardless of an exception is thrown or not thrown. If there will be only in one way where this finally block will not skip, or might skip, or it may not be executed, but that is due to, like it uninterruptedly the application is closed up, it exits, right? With some exception, or not exception, but the system, the application itself is closed down. So, or either you call system.exit at 0 or 1, right? So it will close up. Now, finalize, if you see, it's an method which is of an object class, and basically you have to override that, and then you have to write your logic of garbage collecting that particular object, right? So basically there is no guarantee that it will be called up, but basically it is used to clean up that particular resource. Okay. Now, when it comes to interview with Java, or any the sections, right? When it is divided, right, in Java, like there are exception handling, serialization, etc. Right? So this exception is one of the important category. So there might be a questions. So you can expect some questions which might be tricky, or like try to give some ask, like what's the difference between these, what are name some exceptions, right? So this is one of the question, like he will ask, like what is an exception, right? And basically there are two categories, like what is checked exception and unchecked exception. So he will try to ask, like what are the difference between them, can we explain? So basically what is exception is, like when you're trying to execute a code, there is an event which disrupt the normal flow of program, right? So it stops, and then it either the exception handling code handles it, or like it's propagate to the next level, and then it ultimately stops at the main thread, and then it ultimately stop the program, right? But let's say there can be possibility of, like there has been a problem, like you have given an invalid input, or you're trying to give divided by a 0, right? Or let's say you're trying to open a file and you're not able to find the file. So there are different kind of exception for a different scenarios. So in that case, the exception is thrown, and then it is transferred from the method where exactly it is executing to the top level. If there is no handling of that particular, like, so there is no try and catch block written, right? It will propagate to the next level of the stack method where it has been called up, and ultimately if there is no handling happen, then the program terminates. Okay. So exceptions are represented, like there are different at the top level. If you see, there is a throwable class. Under that there are two categories. One is exception, and then one is error. uh, right? So error it says that it will your it's beyond your control, and like you will not be able to deal with that particular exception, right? Like example, like out of memory, stack overflow. So these are not something which we can handle it, right? So these are all JVM takes care of. There is a problem in the JVM, like there is no memory out of right. So the resource handling is garbage collection is not happening properly, or like whatever right reason, whichever it is. So it might cause that particular error. Now exception are the condition that like either caught and then handle, like there are different, like as I said, optional, right? We can handle the null pointer exception, IO exception, SQL exception, right? So these are all like, we will be able to handle it. So that's hence it is called as a checked exception. So I give you an examples like what are there in IO exception and checked exception and unchecked exception. So IO exception, SQL exception, file not found exception, class not found. These are all checked exception. Now it comes to runtime exception. It is also called as an unchecked exception. So the null pointer exception, arithmetic exception, array index out of bounds, and illegal argument exception. Right. So these are the exceptions category. Hope you got that particular difference. So the next subsequent question, or like there is a possibility like he might wanted to trick and then ask that particular question, right? So he may ask you like what if I just throw an exception which is an checked exception, catch an exception, and then I catch it in a unchecked exception, right? So what will happen in this? So if you first throw the checked exception, right? So and then handle the unchecked exception in the exception block, right? It will depend on the order basically. Now basically the catch block, if you see right, the check exception will always come before. So in Java there is an order, right? So first you have to handle the checked exception, then you have to go for the unchecked exception. Now because why? Because unchecked exception are subclasses of runtime, and basically if you see the Java, what it follows is right, you have to a rule it follows is right, so it has to first check the most specific one. So then it will go from the very bottom to the top, right? It will go in the reverse order. Then we can catch the unchecked exception and other stuff, right? So that's the reason. Now you might get a compilation error. Now, there is a feature which was introduced. So basically, I think it was introduced in 14, right? So, a record. So, if you have heard of Lombok, right? So, where you create, like, there is an annotation, like, you get a, at the rate getter, at the rate setter, no argument constructor, all argument constructor, right? So, these are all, annotation when it doesn't need to write that particular boilerplate code, that will automatically take care. Now, similar on the similar line, there was a feature introduced record, which is kind of a specially class which will have that particular boilerplate code, right? So which will have that particular design to have it as an first of all, it will be an immutable class, it will be immutable data. So it's simple, like it will just remove that particular boilerplate code. It can be used for like getter, setter methods, equals, hash code method, to string. So now ideally what we do is that we override this particular method and then we have their own implementation, right? So here, if you use this particular record, you will doesn't have to do that, and record will automatically take care of this. So it is like the benefit of using it, right? It's compact. It's you have a unnecessary. You doesn't need to write that boilerplate code, and then basically it supports the immutability, and then it's clearly and concisely written, right? Now, this is one of the important topics. So serialization, like there can be multiple questions can be asked around it. So in general, like at the broader level, you will be asked like what is the serialization? What is a serializable UID, right? So serialization is a topic where it's a process of like converting an object into a byte string, right? So so that it can be easily stored in some of the file database, transmitted into database, or like you're transferring to some other location, right? So what happened is that once you convert this, right, so better with the help of this particular byte code, you will be able to create that particular object from that, right? So that's the benefit of it. And then the common usage, I would say, is for sending it over the network, or like database where you have to try to store it, right? And to make a class serializable, you need to there is a serializable interface you must implement, right? So this is called as an marker interface because it has got no method, it doesn't have any method. But internally, when you tag this particular implement or this particular interface, the Java internally recognize this particular implementation class that this has to be serialized and that has to be taken care in a special way. So under that, there is a serialization version UID, which is a unique identifier for a class. So basically, it's a mechanism that when you're trying to deserialize an object, right? It will check the compatibility of the version which is used while serialization. So the object, whatever it is serialized, right, it is stored in the serializable data. So it will be stored. Now, during the deserialization process, it checks that particular user ID, that serializable version ID, and it should match that particular thing. So, if there is a if it is not matching, right? So, what will happen? It will throw an exception. It says that invalid class exception is thrown. Now, it indicates that somebody has modified something in the attributes or some version has been changed in it. So first of all, and then why exactly it is needed, right? So it is used for checking the compatibility of it, explicit versioning of it, right? So you'll be able to deal with I mean, your purpose will be solved by storing it, and then it is untouched by anybody, so that you are getting the raw data, whatever it was stored. There has been a feature called text blocks. So if you go to the any let's say notepad and you write something on the next 10 lines, right? So basically it's a new line character, and then and at the very end of this particular line, every line you enter it, that there is a new line character introduced, right? So now similar to that particular this text block that has been introduced. So it was introduced in 13, and then it looks like there is a multi-line string. It's not when you're trying to create a string, right? It ideally has to be created on a single line, or basically the help of that particular class character concrete destination. But ideally, without the escape character and a special character introduced in it, right? So you can introduce and then you can write that. So text block supports basically uh, uh, multiple lines of code. Write you can write a large content inside it. So multi-line it is, and then it has an essence of it's similar to the JSON or SQL queries and HTML, right? So it is placed under the literals, and then it can span around multiple lines. It can and it is closed with the double quote text marks, question marks. Now, the benefit of using is you doesn't need to have an escape new line character introduced. Right? So quite readable, and then you preserve that particular indentation style for it, right? So this is the benefit. Now, what is Stream API? So basically, Stream API is nothing but it has been part of Java 8, and that is one of the feature introduced in it. So it's a package like Java Development. So it's a high level functional approach, right? Functional style approach to process or the sequence of data. So you can take an input of as a collection array or your channels, right? So it is designed to stream process that in a declarative and efficient manner, right? So same it will take a sequence of character, right? And then it will be processed either parallelly or either sequentially. So so it will be more concise, and then it is more readable, right? And it's in a declarative way. So earlier to, before Java 8, what we used to do is that we used to process and then we used to iterate, and then, we make it use of the imperative methods to use loops, iterators, right? So you perform operation. However, it was quite, difficult and also cumbersome, and there can be a possibility of error, right? So it was hard to maintain that particular operation, and then, on such complex structures. So they have introduced this particular Stream API, so that it is quite concise, and then you're doing what it is required, and it supports it make use of the functional programming. So parallelism programming, like we can make use of it, so that it make use of the multiple threads. And then if you see, there are two things inside it. One is an intermediate operation and one is an terminal operation. So lazy evaluation, as in, like, until you doesn't call the terminal operation, your intermediate methods will not be called up, like filter or any of the map will not perform the operation until you have, like, convert it into a string, or like for each any of this particular method is called. And then it's quite readable, and then also it is quite maintainable to the code, right? So I hope you got that particular why stream is being used. Now, he gave me another example of, a scenario of this question, that he wanted to, from a string field list, right? He wanted to identify that, all the words which are, more than 3 character long, right? So he wanted to, greater than length, which are, greater than 3, you wanted to find all this particular character as a list. So this is the code which I have written it and showed it. So when it comes to, we are working on a Maven project, right? So basically, if you see Spring Boot application, or earlier when we are trying to build up any Java module based or Java based application, right? We make use of the Maven. Now, what Maven is, like, it's an automation tool, right? It's primarily used to, for with Java, right? So what happens is that, it builds it, it's manage the dependency, and then it's a configuration. It configures that particular project structure as well. So it manages, like, your build, reporting, documentation as well, right? So in a efficient manner. So there are some dependency management also inside that, it is based on that. So now it's basically dependent on that particular POM model. That's project object model. So which is, like, the kind of configuration file that is pom.xml, which describes all this particular, structure, I would say. So at the top, like, you will see the project structure is dependency, the life cycle. You'll have the plugins, the dependency management, and other configuration related information. So the making you I mean, it's a build tool, I would say. So the structure is very quite standardized. So all have that got their own predefined rules and, segments. The dependency management happen inside the automation tool. It's a build automation tool, repository management. So there is a repository disconnected from the local to, right. So it's management. It takes care of that. You have that particular integration with the CI/CD pipe, right? So it's quite easy to integrate. Now, under that particular POM.xml, there is a section called dependency management. So he had asked me, like, what is the purpose of it? Ideally, basically, he wanted to understand whether I worked on Maven, and, like, basically what exactly the POM.xml does. Okay. So if you see in that particular section, so it's used for managing that particular version of the dependencies. That, it can be spread across the multiple modules in the project, right? So it's a central location, it's a central space, that where you specify the version of the dependencies without needing to specify in each individual dependency, I would say. So if you see if you once mention the particular version, right, the all other dependencies will automatically take care of that particular versions. So it ensures that, there is a consistency in all the dependencies, so that, version is not, incompatible. Okay, so it's used for, centralized version management. It is used for consistency across the modules, and then it inheritantly, acquires a particular uh, uh, dependencies. Now, there is a scope, like, after that particular, that particular tags, right? There is one tag called scope in that particular model. So under that, there are, different scopes, I would say. So two of them is, like, compile and test. So basically, it will, like, given visibility of that particular dependency in a different phases of the life cycle, right? So build life cycle, it is used. So there is a two scope, I would say, compile and the test scope, where it determines where and how the dependencies are included in the build. Okay, so if you just differentiate it into different I would say aspect or the context, right? So the basically compile will have its a default scope is it doesn't need to specify it, but test need to specifically specify it, right? And this compile time is available for all the build lifecycle, but in the test it is only available for tests in the class path, right? So you cannot make it use it in another lifecycle. Now you can package it, right? So you can package it into a final artifact. But testing purpose, there is no, it's not included in the final artifact that this particular things, right? Now, libraries require production and the testing, right? Use case it is used at the compile, so you're trying to test it and then production, right? Libraries which are required over there. So this has to be explicitly exclusively required over there for the test. Now you gave me an SQL question. You wanted that can you write a code where a SQL query where I need to have some column which is equal to or like I would say has got car, and then it has to be in the descending order. So basically we can make use of this particular order by a clause, and then also basically there is a in the where clause condition we can make use of this like clause which has got this percentage, and then you can write that particular car. Okay. Now, Spring Boot. Now, basically, this is one of the favorite question for an interviewer, right? So he will ask about at the rate Spring Boot application, at the rate component, at the rate REST controller. So annotations are quite frequently asked, and basically, if you see the major important feature of Spring Boot is configuration, the auto configuration. So this is one of the primary important and the very mandatory annotation which is used. So basically it is used to indicate that this class is in source of being and it's a bean and it's got some configuration, right? So it plays a key role in defining it. So here you will be able to define a bean, it can be used in in yeah, I mean, we can make use of it either in the bean declaration, we can make it use in Java-based configuration, singleton beans, like in a green field, proxy-based enhancement, right? So basically, we can make use of this configuration whenever we require a certain configuration to be enabled and used up, right? Now, when it comes to ambiguity, right? So there are, let's say, for an implementation, right? There are two different interface, there are two different implementation. Now, how do you solve that particular ambiguity? How Spring container will understand which class to load up, right? So basically, Spring has come up with the provision of there are multiple bean of same type, right? So without breaking that particular flow, right? You can actually define those which particular dependency it has to append or make use of it, and then there will be no conflict, so that we can inject inside it. So there is one of the annotation that is at the rate primary, which we can make use of. Either that we can make use of it, or second option we have as an qualifier. Okay, there is another way where we can use it using the Java configuration as well. Now, making use of at the rate profile also can be used there are different environments like dev, specific test, staging, and other, right? So we can make use of that as well to handle the ambiguity. Now there's also an at the rate conditional, right? So while being getting registered, right, you can make use of this particular at the rate condition annotation and achieve that. Now making use of the particular application context also we can use it, handle it. Now, let's say you wanted some custom properties to be defined or custom attributes to be defined from the property. You have to load that from the property. Right? How do you do that? So, in that property file, or let's say in the YML file, there are two configuration files, right? So, one is the what we can make use of the at the rate value. So you have to give that particular exact syntax, and you have to, in that particular value, you have to define that particular, I would say, the key kind of thing which you have to include in it. There is an configuration property also which we can make use of when achieve that particular loading that particular property. We can make use of an environment interface. That's where we can actually load the particular properties, and then we can use that custom properties also, right? Uh, and now design patterns. Design patterns are basically like, you must have already heard, right? It's one of the, common resolution for an, problems which are normal when you're designing an application. There are some standard way to handle those particular, there are solutions, right? So one of the strategy they asked me, like, have you worked on, strategy design pattern? What is the difference between, factory design pattern and strategy design pattern? Now, this basically, like, there are these are, totally different. It is used for a different purpose, right? So both are used in the software development, but what happens is that, strategy design pattern is basically used to act according to the algorithm. So it doesn't exposes the, what's inside it, and then, it encapsulate, I would say. So and make them, it is quite interchangeable. It doesn't tightly coupled it, right? So this allow you to have some algorithm defined, and then independently the client can use it, right? So it doesn't tightly couple it. So based on, dynamically at the runtime, it can decide the algorithm, and then, you can hand it over the object, I would say, the logic. So it supports the solid principle O part, where it says that, open close principle. So it allows, like, different strategies to be defined without modifying the existing code base, right? But when it comes to factory, what happens is that, it is used. I mean that normally we make use of an interface, and then you create an object, right? Without making use, without specifying the concrete implementation. So we make use of that particular interface so that, it delegates the instantiation logic to a subclass, and then, dedicatedly it creates a factory of it. So there is one centralized location where the object creation happens, and then, it's completely abstract the installation and abstract the instantiation process, right? It simplifies by hiding the internal object creation process, I would say. Okay. Now, the another popular question is when it comes to, design pattern interview questions, right? So factory design pattern, and then abstract design pattern. Now, abstract, basically, if you see, it's basically an abstract factory design pattern, right? So not in simply abstract design pattern, but when it comes to factory design pattern, right? So what happens is that um, they basically both are like, I would say a creational design pattern only, but it basically used in a different intent, or like, it has got different use case. Okay. Now factory design pattern, it defines, like, at a standard at the top level the interface for define creating an object, but it allows only via through the subclass, right? There are different types of objects created for it. Now the creation logic is encapsulated, and the client relies only on the factory to get that particular object. Like, it relies, like, it will ask for it, and then, it creates it, and it hand it over to the client. Now it will focus only on, like, creation of an object, one type of an object basically. Now what happens when it comes to, abstract design factory pattern, right? But factory design pattern, right? So it's completely, I would say, one level above the factory design pattern, and it is used for creating families of, or of a related or a dependent in objects, right? So without, specifying their content implementation, I would say. So at the high level, it's a factory method. So it is used for creating multiple related objects. Okay. So oftenly, like, I would say it is used for creating a system that involve multiple families or a set of related products, I would say. Okay. Hope you got the difference. Now, basically, like when it comes to, interview questions, right? After he is satisfied with your development, or, the day-to-day questions, right? I would say there will be a a section dedicated, or like he will try to understand. Nowadays, like testing is quite important, right? Whether whether the development or not. I mean, if you are not familiar with much, and but definitely there will be much questions which are asked for testing. So you'll try to understand that you have worked on the testing frameworks, or like you are doing manual testing, unit testing, integration testing. So this is quite important that whatever the code you write, right, it has to be tested. Like there is whatever the component you are writing, it has to be clear tested. So there are different, I would say, layers, right? Controller layer, service layer, repository layer, right? So how can you test it, right? So you'll try to get an understanding, like you'll try to ask how do you test it, what's the framework you have used, right? So I just categorized here so that I get a high level understanding, like what when a developer does a development and then he does the unit testing, right? He make use of like either JUnit or Mockito or Power Mock, right? So you can make use of it, but that is purely like when that is after the development purpose. Now after that development happened, like there can be different testings, right? Integration testing is done. So now integration testing is basically what, like it is testing with the database, right? The Spring Boot, there is a test, right? We can integrate and test with different modules, right? Now there will be an end-to-end testing which can be done. Now, what is end-to-end testing? It is complete, testing the each component and each application, right? There are multiple, from start to end, you can test the complete flow, right? So there are, Selenium, there are Cucumber. Now, there is also called as a behavior-driven testing. So basically, it is used for API testing and other, driven behavior-related testing, essentially. Now, when you're working in the SDLC projects, like your software, right, software industry, right? So you must have come across this particular word like agile, right? So earlier, if you see, you used to heard like waterfall model, right? So but nowadays, like it's quite agile. Like agile methodologies has been used. We have different methodologies like Scrum, Kanban. There are different like lean software development, extreme programming, the safe, then the crystal, right? So basically it's a way where you handle your project, and like in the development, so you track that particular and manage that particular project. So it's gives you a flexibility, collaborating with the teams, iterative process, so that your development, build, deploy is happening on a quite dynamic way. So basically, the goal is to have customer getting the deliverables quite faster with the early feedback. And if there are challenges, like we have to deal with that, and then you break that into a small chunk, and then you deliver it in a manageable, and then in a small iteration. Okay, so there's a continuous flow of I mean releases of that particular software. We are changing, like as the changes coming on, like we are quickly adapting, and then making those particular changes in it. So we closely interact with the team, so that we get the input, and then we implement it from the business team. Like there are certain stakeholders who does the business decision, and they want some features to be implemented. So like focus is on, like we should be delivering the value, and then it is quite incremental, I would say. It's quite dynamic. Okay, as I already told, like there are different methodologies, so hope you got this. If you have heard of Docker, right, so basically it's an open source containerization tool. So basically it's used for simplifying the development and deployment and then operation of an application, right? So what happens is that, well, it solves the problem of, like it works in my environment and it is not working in another environment, right? So basically, to solve that particular purpose, it actually create it gives you an environment where you can actually build that, deploy that, and test it so that it works in a similar manner wherever it is deployed and wherever it is being used up. So it's basically it's a lightweight, portable containers where you can actually manage your dependencies, package that application dependencies, and then you can test it. Like the developer will be able to easily test that with a different environments, I would say. So across there are different environment, different machines, right? You can actually test it. So which will reflect your different environments like testing, staging, feature, and production. So it helps your application to be containerized. It's quite easy for the development and deployment. So it's quite portable so that it can be moved to any another location. You can easily scale up when it is required, and then it is quite efficient. So it basically supports the microservice architecture as well. So basically when you're dealing with multiple microservices, it is quite efficient, and then it's handy when it comes to making use of Docker. And it's integrated with the continuous integration CI/CD pipeline. And then it's quite, I would say, we can introduce the security aspect of it. So you can actually maintain different versions of an application. Hope we got the difference and what exactly the Docker is about, right? Uh, Hope this particular video is uh, making your interview better when you're trying to attend, right? So it gives you a glimpse of what kind of question is being asked, and uh, it it make you understand what can be the questions it can be asked up. And basically if you are trying to attend an interview which is Luxoft, right, you can expect similar or maybe at least 80 to 90% of the questions might be similar, so that easily you'll be able to understand what's the mindset of the interviewer and what kind of questions are asked. Hope this video has helped you all with the questions which are actually asked in the interview, and it was helpful to you for the preparation. Thank you.